Hello and happy Epiphany, or Merry Epiphany. I'm not quite sure, but since we still are in Christmastide, I can say Merry Christmas. Um, for those of you who follow the Christian calendar, you'll know that Epiphany is traditionally the day when the church marks the coming of the wise men to visit Jesus. And it's also the end of the Christmas season, so this is kind of the last day when we can say Merry Christmas. We still have one more installment of our reading for the time being after Christmas, but we'll get there. Oh, and today is also Joan of Arc's birthday, so happy birthday, Joan. Our reading for today, which again is our 8th and penultimate installation of For the Time Being by W.H. Auden, is called The Massacre of the Innocents. Let me try that again. The Massacre of the Innocents. This one requires a little bit of background and sort of just a quick rehash of the story so far. So if you remember in the Christmas story, when the wise men show up in Jerusalem, they go to Herod and they're like, hey, there's a new king. Do you know where he might be? And Herod's like, new king? I don't know. So he talks to the Jewish scribes and scholars and rabbi, and they say, oh yeah, well, the Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem. So Herod's like, cool. Why don't you go to Bethlehem? Oh, and when you're there, say hi to the new king for me. And when you get back, let me know where he is and I'll go say hi myself. And the wise men are like, cool, will do. So they head off, and fall down and worship him, as the story describes. And then they're gonna go back and, tell Herod, but they're warned in a dream to maybe skip town without saying hi to Herod, which is probably a good idea. And then when Herod finds out that they have basically tricked him, he does something really nasty. And let me read this section from Matthew 2. This is Matthew 2, starting at verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted, because they are no more. In Auden's section, we hear almost all the voices that are mentioned in that passage. So it opens with this long kind of diatribe from Herod, expressing his discomfort and bewilderment at this decision he has to make. This coming of this new king, this child, has really thrown a wrench in the works of all of these wonderful civic and social improvement projects he's been doing in his time. So he kind of walks us through that from his perspective, and kind of why he has to commit this horrible act. And then we have a short, what feels like military song from the soldiers who have been, sent out to do the deed. And it's about this kind of wacky and chaotic recruit who kind of just bumbles around and happens to end up in the army just in time to massacre the innocents, as it reads here. And then finally, we have a short little section from Rachel herself, the Rachel weeping in Ramah. Now, if you remember your biblical history, Rachel is the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and for a long time she was barren, and her sister Leah kind of gloated over her because Leah had so many children. And both Ramah and Rachel are kind of these recurring images in the Bible of captivity and barrenness, but of the Lord also being faithful to his people. So she speaks a word on grief. So, without further me talking, let's dive into this passage. So again, this first chunk is from Herod. Because I am bewildered, because I must decide, because my decision must be in conformity with nature and necessity, let me honor those through whom my nature is by necessity what it is. As a reminder, this section is Herod's voice, and he's describing how he came to the decision he makes. Because I am bewildered, because I must decide, because my decision must be in conformity with nature and necessity, let me honor those through whom my nature is by necessity what it is. To fortune, that I have become a tetrarch, that I have escaped assassination, that at 60 my head is clear and my digestion sound. To my father, for the means to gratify my love of travel and study. To my mother, for my straight nose. To Eva, my colored nurse, for regular habits. To my brother Sandy, who married a trapeze artist and died of drink, for so refuting the position of the hedonists. To Mr. Stewart, nicknamed the Carp, who instructed me in the elements of geometry, through which I came to perceive the errors of the tragic poets. To Professor Lighthouse, for his lectures on the Peloponnesian War. To the stranger on the boat to Sicily, for recommending to me Brown on resolution. To my secretary, Miss Button, for admitting that my speeches were inaudible. There is no visible disorder, no crime. What could be more innocent than the birth of an artisan's child? Today has been one of those perfect winter days, cold, brilliant, and utterly still, when the bark of a shepherd's dog carries for miles, and the great wild mountains come up quite close to the city walls, and the mind feels intensely awake. And this evening, as I stand at this window, high up in the citadel, there is nothing in the whole magnificent panorama of plain and mountains to indicate that the empire is threatened by a danger more dreadful than any invasion of Tartars on racing camels or conspiracy of the Praetorian Guard. Barges are unloading soil fertilizer at the river wharves. Soft drinks and sandwiches may be had in the inns at reasonable prices. Allotment gardening has become popular. The highway to the coast goes straight up over the mountains, and the truck drivers no longer carry guns. Things are beginning to take shape. It is a long time since anyone stole the park benches or murdered the swans. There are children in this province who have never seen a louse, shopkeepers who have never handled a counterfeit coin, women of 40 who have never hidden in a ditch except for fun. Yes, in 20 years I have managed to do a little. Not enough, of course. There are villages only a few miles from here where they still believe in witches. There isn't a single town where a good bookshop would pay. One could count on the fingers of one hand the people capable of solving the problem of Achilles and the tortoise. Still, it is a beginning. In 20 years, the darkness has been pushed back a few inches. And what, after all, is the whole empire with its few thousand square miles on which it is possible to lead the rational life, but a tiny patch of light compared with those immense areas of barbaric night that surround it on all sides, that incoherent wilderness of rage and terror, where Mongolian idiots are regarded as sacred, and mothers who give birth to twins are instantly put to death, where malaria is treated by yelling, where warriors of superb courage obey the commands of hysterical female impersonators, where the best cuts of meat are reserved for the dead, where, if a white blackbird has been seen, no more work may be done that day, where it is firmly believed that the world was created by a giant with 3 heads, or that the motion of the stars are controlled from the liver of a rogue elephant. Yet even in this little civilized patch itself, where, at the cost of heaven knows how much grief and bloodshed, it has been made unnecessary for anyone over the age of 12 to believe in fairies, or that first causes reside in mortal and finite objects, So many are still homesick for that disorder wherein every passion formerly enjoyed a frantic license. Caesar flies to his hunting lodge, pursued by ennui. In the faubourgs of the capital, society grows savage, corrupted by silks and scents, softened by sugar and hot water, made insolent by theatres and attractive slaves. And everywhere, including this province, new prophets spring up every day to sound the old barbaric note. I have tried everything. I have prohibited the sale of crystals and Ouija boards. I have slapped a heavy tax on playing cards. The courts are empowered to sentence alchemists to hard labor in the mines. It is a statutory offense to turn tables or feel bumps. But nothing is really effective. How can I expect the masses to be sensible when, for instance, to my certain knowledge, the captain of my own guard wears an amulet against the evil eye, and the richest merchant in the city consults a medium over every important transaction? Legislation is helpless against the wild prayer of longing that rises day in, day out, from all these households under my protection. O God, put away justice and truth, for we cannot understand them and do not want them. Eternity would bore us dreadfully. Leave thy heavens and come down to our earth of water clocks and hedges. Become our uncle, look after baby, amuse grandfather, escort madam to the opera, help Willie with his homework, introduce Muriel to a handsome naval officer. Be interesting and weak like us, and we will love you as we love ourselves. Reason is helpless, and now even the poetic compromise no longer works. All those lovely fairy tales in which Zeus, disguising himself as a swan or a bull or a shower of rain or what have you, lay with some beautiful woman and begot a hero. For the public has grown too sophisticated. Under all the charming metaphors and symbols, it detects the stern command: be and act heroically. Behind the myth of divine origin, it senses the real human excellence that is a reproach to its own baseness. So, with a bellow of rage, it kicks poetry downstairs and sends for prophecy. Your sister has just insulted me. I asked for a God who should be like me as possible. What use to me is a God whose divinity consists in doing difficult things that I cannot do, or saying clever things that I cannot understand? The God I want and intend to get must be someone I can recognize immediately without having to wait and see what he says or does. There must be nothing in the least extraordinary about him. Produce him at once, please. I'm sick of waiting. Today, apparently, judging by the trio who came to see me this morning with an ecstatic grin on their scholarly faces, the job had been done. God has been born, they cried. We have seen him ourselves. The world is saved. Nothing else matters. One needn't be much of a psychologist to realize that if this rumor is not stamped out, in a few years it is capable of diseasing the whole empire. One shouldn't have to be a prophet to predict the consequences if it should. Reason will be replaced by revelation. Instead of rational law, objective truths perceptible to anyone who will undergo the necessary intellectual discipline, and the same for all, knowledge will disintegrate into a riot of subjective visions, feelings in the solar plexus, induced by undernourishment. Angelic images generated by fevers or drugs, dream warnings inspired by the sound of falling water. Whole cosmogonies will be created out of some forgotten personal resentment. Complete epics written in private languages, the daubs of school children ranked above the greatest masterpieces. Idealism will be replaced by materialism. Priapus will only have to move to a good address and call himself Eros to become the darling of middle-aged women. Life after death will be an eternal dinner party where all the guests are 20 years old. Diverted from its normal and wholesome outlet in patriotism and civic or family pride, the need of the materialistic masses for some visible idol to worship will be driven into totally unsocial channels where no education can reach it. Divine honors will be paid to silver teapots, shallow depressions in the earth, names on maps, domestic pets, ruined windmills, even in extreme cases, which will become increasingly common, to headaches, or malignant tumors, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Justice will be replaced by pity as the cardinal human virtue, and all fear of retribution will vanish. Every corner boy will congratulate himself. I'm such a sinner that God had to come down in person to save me. I must be a devil of a fellow. Every crook will argue, I like committing crimes. God likes forgiving them. Really, the world is admirably arranged. And the ambition of every young cop will be to secure a deathbed repentance. The new aristocracy will consist exclusively of hermits, bums, and permanent invalids. The rough diamond, the consumptive whore, the bandit who is good to his mother, the epileptic who has a way with animals, will be the heroes and heroines of the new tragedy, when the general, the statesman, and the philosopher have become the butt of every farce and satire. Naturally, this cannot be allowed to happen. Civilization must be saved, even if it means sending for the military, as I suppose it does. How dreary. Why is it that in the end, civilization always has to call in these professional tidiers to whom it is all one, whether it be Pythagoras or a homicidal lunatic that they are instructed to exterminate? Oh, dear. Why couldn't this wretched infant be born somewhere else? Why can't people be sensible? I don't want to be horrid. Why can't they see that the notion of a finite God is absurd? Because it is. And suppose, just for the sake of argument, that it isn't, that this story is true, that this child is in some inexplicable manner both God and man. He grows up, lives, and dies without committing a single sin. Would that make life any better? On the contrary, it would make it far, far worse. For it could mean only this, that once having shown them how, God would expect every man, whatever his fortune, to lead a sinless life in the flesh and on earth. Then indeed would the human race be plunged into madness and despair. And for me personally, at this moment, it would mean that God had given me the power to destroy himself. I refuse to be taken in. He could not play such a horrible practical joke. Why should he dislike me so? I've worked like a slave. Ask anyone you like. I read all the official dispatches without skipping. I've taken elocution lessons. I've hardly ever taken bribes. How dare he allow me to decide? I've tried to be good. I brush my teeth every night. I haven't had sex for a month. I'm a liberal. I object. I'm a liberal. I want everyone to be happy. I wish I had never been born. The soldiers. When the sex war ended with the slaughter of the grandmothers, they found a bachelor's baby suffocating under them. Somebody called him George, and that was the end of it. They hitched him up to the army. George, you old debutante, how did you get in the army? In the retreat from reason, he deserted on his rocking horse and lived on a fairy's kindness till he tired of kicking her. He smashed her spectacles and stole her checkbook and mackintosh, then cruised his way back to the army. George, you old numero, how'd you get in the army? Before the diet of sugar, he was using razor blades, and exited soon after with an allergy to maidenheads. He discovered a cure of his own, but no one would patent it. So he showed up again in the army. George, you old fly-by-night, how did you get in the army? When the Vice Crusades were over, he was hired by some Muscovites, prospecting for deodorants among the Eskimos. He was caught by a common cold and condemned to the whiskey mines, but schmezzled back to the army. George, you old emperor, how did you get in the army? Since peace was signed with honor, he's been minding his business. But, here comes his idleness, buttoning his uniform, just in time to massacre the Innocents. He's come home to roost in the army. George, you old matador, welcome back to the army. Rachel. On the left are grinning dogs, peering down into a solitude too deep to fill with roses. On the right are sensible sheep, gazing up at a pride where no dream can grow. Somewhere in these unending wastes of delirium is a lost child, speaking of long ago in the language of wounds. Tomorrow, perhaps, he will come to himself in heaven. But here, grief turns her silence, neither in this direction nor in that, nor for any reason. And her coldness now is on the earth forever. And that concludes our 8th and second to last installment of For the Time Being by W.H. Auden. If you've been with us this whole time, whew, congratulations, and also thank you. And I hope you'll join us for our 9th and final installment next week. And have a merry last day of the Christmas season. Thanks for being with us.